For many years now, Australians have been enjoying Netflix, but now they are the victim of a streaming war. You've got Apple TV Plus, you've got Disney launching as well. So they've done something very interesting. They've actually started releasing something they said they would never do, which is viewer numbers, because now they have a story to tell. They've got to compete for actors, directors, content. But what does this mean for the future of not just Netflix, but the wider streaming wars? Also, how many of these things are you going to have to sign up for? To debate that, we have Claire Reilly from CNET and we have Ben Grubb from Fairfax/The Nine Network. All right, so what is it exactly that Netflix have said they're going to do?
Apple's pushing aggressively here, and this is one of the reasons why they are releasing these numbers, because Apple's doing a bundle deal now. When you get a new iPhone or a new Apple product, you get 12 months free subscription to the Apple TV service. And so Reed Hastings, is that?
Yeah, he's the original
CEO of
Netflix, yes.
Yeah. He's come out and said that, the subscriber numbers, which is what's typically been touted as to, that's how success, doesn't mean anything when there's all these bundle deals going on with Amazon, Apple.
So the metric he's been using for many, many years no longer applies because other companies...
It's inconvenient.
Yes.
It's like when you're playing tips in the playground, someone decides something's on bar and then, someone can reach it really easily. It's like, well, no, okay, well, I'm changing the rules.
Yeah, the goalposts are being moved and...
That's the more conventional metaphor, yes.
Yes. Sorry, what was the licking of the something earlier?
Oh, look, who knows?
But even though I think it's slightly hypocritical for him to move the goalpost on a metric that he's been using for some time, he's come forward and he's put forward that actually the metric that we should be examining is time, right?
And not a metric that Netflix necessarily is putting out. He's promoting Nielsen, which does surveys usually, and much like radio ratings.
Famously, they did the TV ratings for many, many years too.
Yeah, and I think now it's some sort of OzTam might do that in Australia. And often they do it based on like a sample of like 1,000 or 2,000, and then they extrapolate that to the Australian population because all of Australia is watching TV, of course.
Naturally.
And so, I think he says that Netflix consumes about, in at least the US, 10% of TV time.
So the quote here is, so the real measurement will be time. How do consumers vote with their evenings, and do they end up watching what mix of all the services? And I think, honestly, he might be right. I think that's a fair thing if we can get real and comparable numbers, which not everybody has an impetus to want to deliver, Claire.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think he's right that the idea of we have, especially as we enter the streaming wars and our time becomes more valuable and we're subscribing to a million different types of content, we only have one set of eyeballs for now. So
the night is young.
Yes. So what are we choosing to spend our evenings watching? And they have kind of before now released limited numbers, but I think...
When they've got a good story to tell.
Exactly. So
like
Bird
35
Box,
million households watched the Stranger Things.
Precisely, yeah. Bird Box was sort of got up to 80 million. Sex Education, that kind of young adult skewed TV show, got, I think, 40 million in the first 4 weeks. And you think about big series in the US, traditionally 20 million is a really, really good number for audiences. So they have a good story to tell. They're really spruiking that. But of course, I guess it's like anything in a free market, right? As soon as you start to have really strong competition, then they're going to have to up their game. And Netflix is probably going to have to start saying, all right, well, to prove we're still valuable, we're going to give you a bit more information. It's not clear whether they're going to give the data to Nielsen themselves, whether Nielsen will still do its kind of slightly, well, not janky, but they don't necessarily get data from Netflix. Well, they haven't until now, so they've made estimations.
Seems very imperfect
It's
to
like
me.
trying to get the idea of where do Australians politically lie, but just looking on Twitter.
Yeah.
But also the OzTam ratings required you to have a box plugged in, or, maybe ratings required you to get called up on your landline. So that's naturally skewing towards an older audience, maybe not watching on mobile. I'm interested because Netflix knows who's watching what. They know how far they're watching through a program. They know probably a lot about the demographics who's watching.
Because obviously they don't need to deal with advertisers, so that's why you wouldn't make it public. But I would also say that from a talent standpoint, it's also complicated, right? Because you don't know if you've got a successful series on one of these things unless they're now starting to share more information. Last I heard that they won't.
I wonder if they will go down the advertising route. Like, numbers are useful, I guess, for, determining how to model the pricing and whether to increase it. I think they have been increasing it.
Gradually
in the US.
they sort of increase it here and there.
In Australia, news publications have typically had page impressions as a key metric in like the 2010s perhaps and earlier. And then it moved, depending on the different publisher, to a subscriber model with a mix of advertising. And then the metric internally at some of these organisations became about time on article or time on site. But that hasn't translated to advertisers in that space yet. You can't go to an advertiser. You can try, but you can't go to an advertiser and say, oh, we've got higher engagement than a competitor. But that is definitely a push that's being made. It is interesting how the advertisers are what end up driving the business models.
But interestingly, you think about YouTube, right? And watch time is everything on YouTube. So that's the engagement time there. So it's kind of different.
So as in watch time, as in how long they watch the video itself? How long people are watching. So you think about Joe Rogan's podcasts, which go for 43 hours. He is popular with advertisers. That's a short one too.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. That's for another day. But, you know, there's a long engagement time. You've got to look at how long people are watching and when they drop off. So there's a whole bunch of metrics there. A cynical person, which is me, would say that are they just changing the goalpost because they have 160 million subscribers worldwide and maybe those numbers are starting to plateau? Apple TV Plus and Disney are going to start to see some real growth because they're coming off a zero base, right? Netflix is really high, so it's not having a massive kind of rate of change. So to say we're commanding more eyeballs and more time, that's an easy metric for them to win on.
There's lots more of this in the podcast. Download this show. We're also picking over the bones of a startup by the name of WeWork. It was enormously valued and now it seems to be in a little bit of trouble. What's happened? You'll just have to download the podcast. It is conveniently called Download This Show and it's available now.